Hello, everybody. I'm John Atack to this day, and this is Douglas Brooks. Shall I call you Doug or Doug?
Doug is good. Yep.
Doug is good. And we're here today to talk about. You've launched a website about multi-level marketing MLMs, and which we both agree share all sorts of characteristics with other types of authoritarian cult. And so we're here to open that subject out a little bit. Where would you like to begin?
Well, like as I was saying to you before we started, I'm happy to be guided by where your interests lie and where your audience's interests lie. I do want to say that one of the reasons I started this site is to provide information for people who are either they're looking into MLM, or they're in an MLM and trying to figure out what happened to them, or they've got a friend or a relative who's involved with it and they're concerned about these people. So one of my objectives is certainly to provide information for people who are looking into the topic. I don't pretend to be unbiased. I am definitely a critic of the industry, but the information that I provide is totally factual. It's and as objective as possible. Another reason for doing it now is there are a number of developments that are ongoing that are going to affect this industry. The Federal Trade Commission, which has avoided regulating the industry to date, now over the past year has issued two notices, and without getting into the technicality of it, they are signaling to the industry that they are looking into various types of regulation. And I and a number of folks that are that sort of share my views of the industry are doing what we can to encourage the FTC to step in here, because it is a systemic problem. Unlike with other industries where you can say there's a bad apple, but it's a basically legitimate industry, you look at MLM and it certainly, and I've looked at hundreds of companies and I've spoken with hundreds of distributors over the years, and the problems surface in every MLM that you look at. There are vast disparities between the incomes earned by a tiny group of people at the top of the chain and the vast majority who make very little and drop out. And then there's the middle people who are in it for longer, and that just means they lose more money. The longer you're in, the more you lose. And combined with the sort of the dismal success rates, we have outrageous earnings claims. Constantly, MLM promoters are saying, you can make, thousands of dollars a month, 10,000, 20,000 a month. I became a millionaire, and you can drive a Rolls Royce, you can buy a vacation home, you can send your kids to college, all these types of representations, which if you ultimately get the numbers, you find that there's just a tiny group, less than 1%, that are actually making the kind of money that would support those lifestyle claims. So there's ferment in the area. I don't know where it's going. I've been following this industry for decades. And the MLM industry is politically very powerful. They have avoided regulation to date. And just to take an example, a few decades ago, actually, the FTC developed a rule called the Business Opportunity Rule, which requires sellers of business opportunities to provide some types of disclosures for people before they pay any money or before they sign anything. So they have basically a week waiting period, and then they get this information and they can look into it. The multi-level marketing industry lobbied very hard and very potently, and they got themselves exempted from this rule. So MLM is the only type, and this is in the US, of course. MLM is the only type of business opportunity in the US that is not subject to some type of pre-sale disclosure rule in this country.
Yeah, I mean, we have a cooling off period here for contracts that you can withdraw from a contract you've signed. I think for within 7 days of signing it.
Yeah.
I mean, this has been with us for a long time. We've had Ponzi schemes going back into the 18th century. You know, the South Sea bubble is one of the famous ones.
Yeah.
The Panama Canal scheme in the 19th century, before they actually built the Panama Canal. And then this leads into these pyramid schemes, which technically in this country are illegal, but practically MLMs like Amway, Herbalife, groups like this have managed to get around this. And still, I mean, I had a very brief encounter. I was about 17, so this 50 years ago. And I for about a week, I knocked on doors selling golden chemical products. The golden chemical was actually coconut oil, which, you know, is not necessarily a bad thing, but I wasn't very good at it. And so after a few days I stopped, but I didn't have to buy, you know, a garage full of stuff before I got going. And later on, when I was involved in Scientology, an incredibly intelligent friend of mine, really one of the smartest people I've ever met, tried to get me into Amway and showed me the plan, as they say. And the strange thing is that, being, you know, deeply engrossed with Scientology, I nonetheless recognized that there was something very off about the way this was being done and about the training that people were being given, which is very much, you know, the recruitment training that you know, I've looked at recruitment. If you look at Al Qaeda and the way they recruit, or you look at the Moonies and the way they recruit, or you then look to a multi-level marketing scheme, the same things will work on people, and so they do the same things. They want to create a fervent response. They want you to feel that a fantastic transformation is going to occur in your life. And it's rather like being at a revival meeting sometimes, you know, this same fervor that's being aroused.
Well, there's so much that you said is fascinating to me, because I'll ask you the question, because a lot of times the MLM folks, they use what they call the curiosity approach. They invite you to a meeting, but they don't tell you really what it's about. They don't tell you the name of the company. Amway people for decades have been trained, don't mention Amway, don't mention multi-level marketing, don't even mention selling. You know, do anything, but you know, don't tell people, just get them to the meeting. Then you come to the meeting, and there's just a bunch of people there that are just wonderful people. They come up, they're very friendly. They tell you how glad they are that you're there and how lucky you are to be there, and they just seem like a really nice group of people. And so, you know, of course your guard is down, and then the presentation starts, and each person that gets up on the stage talks about, you know, they have their rags to riches story, but then they also talk about how the next person up is going to be even more amazing, and they build and build and build to this excitement, so that by the time the main speaker arrives, you know, people are clapping and shouting and standing on their chairs, and they're just so happy, and you get sort of swept up in this excitement. I think there are certainly some parallels there to the cultic recruitment that you can speak to much more fully than I can. But does any of that ring familiar to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing is that you're not being told the truth. You're not being told why you're there. So they'll tell you it's an opportunity or something like that. And the thing is to give you a little bit of a mystery, so that you'll be, it'll be more alluring. And then when you get there, as you say, there are these exuberant people who are, have put on their game face to make you believe that they've achieved all of these wonderful things, which again is like a revival meeting. It's like a Mooney recruiting. Then you'll have the love bombing. You'll have the flattery, the insincere praise, and I can remember when I arrived at Scientology and I was 19. I was in a fairly distressed state because my girlfriend had abandoned me, and I didn't like that. And there were these lovely people, that they really were. They absolutely believed in what they were saying. And I'm sure until you get to pretty much the top level in MLMs, people really, some few people, that 1%, did get lucky. And they will broadcast that sense that will make you want to climb on board, join the bandwagon. Robert Cialdini calls it quite simply the principle of liking, that we feel accepted by a group of people. We feel that something could happen. There's also that sense that, for all of us, like getting rich quick, there is, in fact, no such thing as a free lunch. And of course, in Scientology, there's no such thing as a free personality test either. That's information they're gathering on you and that they could use if they wish to. And in this way, you're being offered something for nothing. And that's always going to be wrong. It's how, I'm a big fan of David Mauer's work on confidence tricksters, which led to the movie The Sting. It comes out of a book he wrote many years ago. And seeing the way that, and he was a linguist, he was somebody who was interested in the terms like cackle bladder, a little chicken's bladder full of blood so you can pretend you've been shot. And through getting to know these people through the language, they liked him and they started telling him things they were doing. And when asked what is the basis of a con, the answer is greed. If you really think you're going to get something for nothing or for very little, then either you got lucky and you're Mark Zuckerberg, or in the other 999,000 cases, you're being conned. You're being brought into something. And the parallels are so interesting. So often the founders of cult groups have been con men, financial con men. Joseph Smith with the Mormons, he'd already been prosecuted successfully for fraud. Ron Hubbard, he was prosecuted for check fraud in San Luis Obispo 2 years before he began Dianetics and Scientology. And of course, we mentioned before we came on camera, Keith Raniere, who ran, was it Consumer Byline, was it?
Consumer, and he was in Amway earlier on, and then he set up his own MLM called Consumer Byline. And it was a cleverly designed pyramid scheme.
And you were saying that you had quite a lot to do with that as a lawyer, trying to help people who'd been caught up in Consumer Byline, yeah?
I did. I filed a class action against the company. We drafted a complaint that was very detailed and explained how the con worked. And about a year after we filed the suit, the New York Attorney General filed a claim, and they sent me a nice letter saying, we appreciate the complaint that you filed and how you analyzed the company, but which was a nice doff of the cap, but they had the power, being the regulators, to actually shut the company down. I mean, for us, we filed the case, and immediately Consumer Byline defended. They said they have an arbitration clause. People sign these contracts, they have no idea what they're signing, and Consumer Byline's maybe one of the earliest MLMs to have an arbitration clause. And in the U.S., there's a law that federal law that favors the enforcement of arbitration clauses. So the judge we had, I mean, we argued, don't enforce this arbitration clause because this is a contract to participate in a pyramid scheme, and pyramid schemes are illegal. They violate public policy, and the judge agreed with us, and so he refused. He denied their motion. But they took an appeal because of the way the federal law is written. They were able to take an appeal and basically stop the litigation from proceeding. And that's the status we were in when the New York AG came in and shut down the company. And this is a Consumer Byline. I think 200,000 or 300,000 people were involved in it. Most of them lost everything. And very little was recovered. I think there was not even enough to pay any restitution to people. I mean, the money was gone, and that's what happens a lot of times with these MLM companies. When the regulators finally move, it's usually too late, and they can only recover a fraction of what people have lost. But at any rate, the New York AG got an order against Keith Raniere, preventing him from being involved in the MLM industry anymore. And then he resurfaced, as we all know, a few years later with this executive success program that ultimately became NXIVM. And as I was telling you before we got on, I again got involved in litigation with Raniere when NXIVM sued Rick Ross and several doctors who had written articles about NXIVM. I agreed to represent them pro bono in litigation in New York that went on for at least 12 years or so. But I during the course of those cases, I became very familiar with the way Raniere operates, and there certainly he used the skills that he developed with Consumer Byline to help him build the NXIVM program.
Yeah, and of course we have the earlier example of Jack Rosenberg, Werner Erhard, who graduated from selling second-hand cars to running a large group awareness training, which was devastating for many of the people who became involved. And developed psychiatric conditions as a consequence of the extreme techniques that were being used. They modified their techniques gradually and became the Forum or Landmark Trust, and Erhard was bought out of it. But again, we see somebody who is fundamentally a salesperson. They're people who sell things, and it doesn't matter what they're selling. So that when we look at what we call cult groups, and that term has become so contentious, I tend to put the word authoritarian or dangerous in front of it to show that we mean those groups which are destructive. Sociologists, of course, have come up with this new religious movements. I was talking with Professor Emerita Eileen Barker, who wrote a book called New Religious Movements more than 30 years ago now. And she was saying she just doesn't use the expression anymore, because I was sort of, well, what do we mean by new? Some people say it's after 1830 with Joseph Smith, some people, and Eileen was among them, said it's after the Second World War. Religious, well, so many groups, the Sullivanians, who are a therapy group, Earhart Seminar Training, they'd be lumped in, and they have no religious pretensions. And then as to whether any of them were movements, so we get to this dangerous place where we don't anymore have a word. The word cult originally meant any group that is devoted to a leader or a teaching. That's what the Oxford Dictionary gives. And it's now, this pejorative meaning has crept in so that it's hard to use the word. But I would very definitely, I wrote a book called Opening Our Minds a few years ago. And what I saw was that if you looked at gangs, if you looked at terrorist groups, if you looked at pedophile grooming, human trafficking, you'll find the same mechanics at work, the same approaches are being used throughout these groups, because these are the things that work on us. And so, again, the recruitment will be similar from one group to another. You'll be made to feel wanted. You'll be made to feel comfortable, that you'll be, buttered up, and the honeymoon period begins. And this notion of the arbitration clauses, this has really come up in the Scientology world, because Scientology learned to have everybody sign these contracts that say, I have no expectation of anything, and you can have all of my money and do what you want to me. And various courts have accepted these contracts and said, well, if you have a problem with Scientology, you'll have to negotiate with Scientology. And that, in 1984, the first court case I worked on is called Ray Ward's B&G. It's a very exciting title. And it became famous as the Leahy case because Mr. Justice Leahy sat. And this was a family issue, and yet he went into open court with his ruling. He was so alarmed by what he found out. And what had happened was very simple, that a couple had separated, and the wife had been told that because the husband was a better Scientologist, he should keep the children. And she was still so much involved in the thought reform process that she agreed to this. And a couple of years later, she's like, where are my kids? What's happened? And goes into court. And of course, this is a situation where Scientology had arbitrated. They'd had one of their so-called chaplains who'd persuaded her to give up her children with a significant amount of pressure. So this brings us into the area of undue influence, which is still, we have here a Coercive Control Act, which recognizes that in an intimate relationship, one person may be exploiting another. I would say that there's a misuse there of the word coercion, because coercion means threat, intimidation, or force. And the exploitation that happens in these relationships doesn't need to be threatening, intimidating, or forceful in any way. And so we look to, when somebody signed an elaborate contract which strips them of all of their rights, and then you've got to go back to the people that conned you into writing this thing for any kind of justice, we really are stuck. So it's the ability to sign away your rights, and that takes us into a contract with no consideration, a contract where you are giving much more than you're getting back, and that allowing the person who got you to sign the contract to determine that just seems crazy to me. There needs to be something.
I recently submitted a paper to the Federal Trade Commission in connection with one of these regulatory movements that they are proceedings that they are pushing forward that may result in regulating MLM. And what I did is I analyzed 3 representative MLM contracts, and it was actually stunning the degree of control that the companies reserve to themselves over these supposed distributors. I mean, supposedly these contracts are distribution agreements. The company is distributing products, and the the people who sign up are the distributors, and they may have different names for it. They all have different terminology, but essentially it's a distribution arrangement. And these are supposedly business agreements. And they do look very much like franchise agreements, which I'm very familiar with because I did a lot of franchising earlier in my career. But there are, they're so one-sided. It's sort of incredible, and they not only have clauses that reserve all sorts of powers to the company retains the right. The MLM company retains the right to modify the contract on notice. You know, they you know, there's no negotiating. They can just say, okay, we're going to change this clause, and here it is. And you signed an agreement that said you're agreeing to this. So essentially, your only option at that point is to leave. And if you leave, you're going to forfeit whatever benefits that you have built up. But that type of clause, I mean, there have been some decisions, court decisions, which have said, hey, if you have a clause like that, you really don't have a contract at all. It's illusory because all of the power is in one side. There is no consideration. But those cases, those decisions are fairly rare. A lot of judges will enforce these things. So people, you know, we were just talking earlier about the sort of recruitment process and how it's designed to sort of get you to lower your guard and think that you are getting involved with a wonderful group of people. So then you sign the agreement in that sort of reduced critical thinking state, and then you find out later that and some of these agreements are you know, over 100 pages long. I mean, what you sign is maybe a page and a half, but there's a clause in there that says, you know, we incorporate by reference our rules and regulations. Well, those go on for 100 pages. So you don't realize when you sign it that you're signing something that's very a sophisticated commercial agreement that has all sorts of clauses that most people would not understand unless they had a lawyer explain it to them. So there is this total imbalance in the recruitment process and in the knowledge that the parties have. And you said, I want to pick up on one thing you said earlier about the going to the relationship here, and that is one of the things that the MLM folks do is they tell you, you know, your friends and your family are going to tell you that you're involved in a pyramid scheme, or that you're going to lose money, and you should avoid those people. Don't let them steal your dreams. And the line is, avoid the dream stealers. Avoid those people who are going to tell you that the naysayers. You've got to be relentlessly positive about everything having to do with this business. You don't ask questions. You don't criticize. You always have to put on your happy face and be positive about everything. And even if you haven't made it yet, you're gonna make it, and you've got to carry that attitude with you, both internally. This is how you should feel yourself, and it's the way you present yourself to other people. So I think for what little I know about cults, I think there, definitely we'll see some parallels there in how cults, and especially this theme of isolation, of just staying away from people who are questioning the validity of what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Alienate any critics and you know seal the person off, isolate them from the possibility of change. Um, you make me think of Tom Waite, talking about contracts. Tom Waite's great line: "The large print giveth, and the small print taketh away."
Yes.
That, and we are now, whenever we accept some app on the World Wide Web, there's this huge, great contract. I mean, how many people actually read them? And finding out that Cambridge Analytica were able to build up 5,000 pieces of information on every adult in the United States by having bought the database of Facebook. And when Brittany Kaiser, who actually sold Cambridge Analytica to Donald Trump, defected and wrote her book about it, Targeted, she said, I think it is 40,000 corporations had bought that database. So, and people really weren't realizing that when they went on Facebook, they were giving copyright in the photographs they posted. They were just being raided completely with this very deliberate. We know now from people who are around Zuckerberg that this was designed, that you were meant to be taken in by this thing. And so here we come to people who are designing contracts which are supposed to be protective of their rights and take away all of our rights. And this bizarre thing where, as you say, if it's like the Marx Brothers, the party in the first part will hereinafter be known as the party in the first part. I don't like that. And off we come. And we get down to the sanity clause. And as Chico says, there is no such thing as a sanity clause, and we lose that. But contracts, it's been there for a long time. Shakespeare had things to say about lawyers. He wasn't very keen about them. Nothing personal about you, Doug, obviously. He didn't know you. But there do seem to be, there seems to be this other way of looking at the world where the normal person, the lay person, is excluded by this elaborate language that is used. I mean, pretty much a loaded language from the point of view. I'd never heard the word contumelious or the word timus before I met lawyers, and I hope I never hear them again. And so it becomes as if one is acknowledging a kind of priesthood of knowledge, that here we are, we're being given this thing by these wise people who've determined this thing. And in fact, signing any contract that you have not read and understood is a dreadful mistake, and something that's been foisted on us on a daily basis. Also, any contract that runs to more pages than you can read in your lunch hour is definitely not a good idea, and certainly one that says, and we include our entire rule book, which you can, have you read our terms and conditions,
It's those, some of those agreements that you describe, the internet agreements, they're called click-through agreements, where you just sort of check a box. And I'll confess, I check the box and I haven't read the whole thing. It's sort of a question of what's at stake. It's one thing if it's giving you access to a website. It's another thing if it represents a financial commitment that may expand over time.
Mm.
And
the problem on the web. The problem on the web is that it's been the harvesting of data, and it's been the understanding that and I still every now and then I'll go onto a website and something will suddenly be recommended to me that I was looking at on another website a few minutes before. Now I know that Amazon looked to the website you've come from and the website you go to, and that's logged. They know that then about you. We have come to a brave new world where our relationship is to some extent contractual now. That I don't think most people realize that they've contracted themselves into these things, and we become more used to this idea, as you say, of click-through contracts. It's like, I'll just turn the pages quickly and sign it at the end without understanding, at all, what's happened and where I've been taken. And who wants to, go and spend $500 having a lawyer check all of the clauses of the click-through contract? When I find myself involved with matters that require contracts, and I'm not very keen on such things, I must say, it takes me days and weeks to get through and come and go with the wording. And what's usually said to me, if I'm in a documentary, in fact, the Seduced, the documentary about Keith Raniere, I was in the room when a woman called Naomi Gibbons gave her first public talk in Manchester. And I was furious when I came out of the room that this woman, who really needed help and counselling, had been put on a stage to perform so that she could be filmed for a documentary. And then I was handed a release form, and it gave universal rights to my image because I'd been in the audience. So I didn't sign the release form, but if you watch Seduced, you will see my face in the room. They didn't really care. But it just the nature of these contracts. And what he said to me most frequently is, everyone else has signed it.
Yeah.
I'm finding myself at a cult conference, countercult conference, where people are really meant to know about this kind of thing. And people are just signing it. We've become used to it, and it would be good to have some legal provision that says that if you could not understand the contract, it is meant to be that if you're drunk when you sign a contract, or if you're under pressure, then it's an unfair contract. But I think with these groups that there needs to be some scrutiny to say the general public need to understand what is being said. We had a thing in the law here in the 1980s about the clarity of contracts, and government material improved tremendously during that period. And then it was suggested that lawyers should not be using Latin as their basic Latin, mutatis mutandi and all of that, which I think was a really good move. To let's have everyday language, and let's have our contracts in everyday language. But given that we have a proportion of our society that's illiterate, but I think we now have quite a large proportion of people who are functionally illiterate. They can read what it says on the page out loud, but they don't understand what it means. And so contracts have, we come into a dangerous area there of comprehension, I think.
I completely agree with you, and although I am a lawyer, it's a source of never-ending amazement that these contracts have evolved to the point where not only are they totally one-sided, but they're totally opaque to anyone who doesn't have a legal background. And even if you're a lawyer, a lot of these contracts are so highly specialized, you may not even understand the implications of certain clauses unless you actually practice in this field. I mentioned franchising. Franchising is a fairly highly specialized area, and there are certain norms in the contracts that get signed. The difference with franchising and MLM is that typically a franchisee is making an investment of, could be 50,000 or 100,000, making a substantial investment, and they often will hire a lawyer to evaluate the opportunity and to read the contract and explain it. No one involved gets involved in MLM does that. It's presented as well, you're only, this is just a $50 starter kit, and sign here, and you're off to the races, and you can't really lose anything because all you bought the starter kit. The key thing, and I think you mentioned this when you had your brief experience with MLM, that you didn't have to buy anything.
Mm.
That's true at the initial stage, at that when you first sign up, it's a fairly cheap investment. What happens with most MLMs, certainly every MLM that I've looked at, is that as you get further into it and as you start recruiting people, in order to get a benefit from those recruits. In other words, the idea is with MLM is you recruit people and then you will make commissions when they buy stuff from the company, and then their recruits and their recruits. And so if that continues long enough, you will have this whole army of recruits underneath you and you will be making lots of commissions. But you only qualify to earn those commissions if you yourself buy X amount of stuff per month, or your group accounts for X amount of stuff. So in effect, you do have these purchase requirements, and it may be that you got into the business for 50 or $100, but after you've been in it for 6 months, you may find yourself spending thousands of dollars a month just to meet those qualifications, and you're willing to spend it because you're being told, just stay with it another few months and you will start making commission checks that will, boggle your mind, that will far exceed the investment that you're making. It's a demonstration of the sunk cost fallacy, where you keep on spending good money to chase bad investments, because you just can't stomach the idea that you've made a bad choice, a bad decision, and you should just cut your losses.
Yeah, I call it inertia. That Robert Cialdini calls it consistency or commitment, and I think it was Anthony Bratkanis wrote a book called Weapons of Fraud, where he talks, in fact, about telephone selling. Remember telephone selling? And he talks that there's a particular case that he's talking about of a woman, an elderly woman who, sent off the $10 to get something, and then, I don't know whether it was a Nigerian prince who was, or the Dutch lottery, or whatever it was. But this idea that you'll make a small investment in something and then it'll come back and say, oh, we've run into a little bit of a problem and we need another $100. I think, if I remember rightly, this woman in the end spent $300,000. She lost her home. Her own kids stopped talking with her because they grew tired of trying to dissuade her from fueling this confidence trickster. And that consistency, that, as I say, I tend to think of it as inertia, that we tend to keep moving in the direction we're going. And so once we have committed to something and said, well, there's going to be money in them thar hills, we keep on going. And the psychology of this, it becomes so fascinating that as you say, there is reduced critical thinking. And I get into conversations with people about critical thinking. I think critical thinking is a great idea. However, my experience is that it's quite easy to subvert. It's quite easy to get somebody to use their reasoning abilities to support the idea, that something is going to work for them. People, again, Cialdini in Influence talks about going to a transcendental meditation recruitment meeting, and two people are at the microphone back and forth, and he's gone with a logic professor, and at the end of their presentation he stands up and he ticks off one question after another, and they can't answer these questions. In fact, one of them, I think, says, I think you have a pretty good point there. Then people in the audience sign up for the course, and Cialdini and the professor are saying, well, why did you sign up? And the answer boils down to, if I think about what you said, I won't take the course. And this course is my last hope to get over this condition. People, their desperation is bought, their hope is bought. And of course, the dream stealers are there to prevent you from, success beyond your wildest dreams, which doesn't tend to happen all that much. I mean, another area where this has recently emerged for me is that the people who are behind The Secret, the law of attraction, which I think is the most dreadful scam, that about a year or so back, they released a new video with the new secret. And it was funny because I was watching it and watched it through and sort of went, well, I haven't actually found anything out that I didn't know already. Basically, I've got to think happy thoughts and good things will happen to me. Doesn't seem to work very well. But they were telling me we are the first people ever to say this. And the peculiar thing was that the platform I was on had just put up Napoleon Hill's 1950s talks, which were really amusing to look at because he's reading off screen and it's all very clumsy. But he was telling us exactly the things that they were telling us, you know, 60, 70 years later. There isn't really that much to sell other than confidence, other than belief, other than hope. And we see people ruined by it. I have a friend who bought into a timeshare in a holiday place and then found, of course, it was completely useless. I have another friend who was bankrupted in a scheme to sell perfume. So we see these devastating effects, and every now and then somebody does make a lot of money. Cryptocurrency. My oldest boy actually made a lot of money in cryptocurrency because he saw what was happening. He knew how to mine it. He knew what to do. He's a computer expert, and he got out before things started to collapse. So, and the same was true for the South Sea bubble or the famous French Mississippi purchase, where
some people made money at it, but
at the beginning,
your timing had to be perfect.
Yeah, and the problem is that, as you say, 99% of people won't make money. They'll simply be providing, you know, caviar and champagne for the 1%, who'll be having these meetings saying about how incredibly successful it is and how wonderful they feel and how you should follow in their footsteps. And whenever somebody publishes a book saying, you know, how to get rich quick, it's like, it reminds me that there was a scheme where somebody put an advertisement in the newspaper and said, want to know how to make money? Send me £5. And you sent them £5 and you got a note back saying, put an ad in the newspaper saying, want to know how to make money? Send me £5.
Well, at least he was honest.
Yeah, ish. So I managed to have a look at the website. It looks very well laid out. What is your hope from the website? Where do you want this to go?
I would certainly, I'd like people to see it. And I'd like to hear back from people as to, you know, is this useful? Is there something else that I should be putting on there? I have a blog. I have I've filled a page of a legal, you know, paper with upcoming topics for the blog, but I'm certainly open to suggestions there. So my hope is to pull together in one place as much information as I can, certainly about from the legal side of that affects MLM and pyramid schemes. I do have a section on there about, you know, con artists and literature, a little bit off topic there, but I'd love to hear. You and I think I've read some of the same books. David Marr's book on con artists is a wonderful book.
Yeah, an absolute classic, and what, written in the 50s or even before that?
I think it was before. I think it might have been before World War II.
Yeah, in the 30s. Yeah,
and just and as I mean, he describes, and the people that he describes running con games back then, they are the people who are today running multi-level marketing schemes. I mean, it's you're using the same techniques, the same human weaknesses, the same psychology and emotion that con artists have always been able to take advantage of.
Yeah.
They've had many years to sort of hone their their pitch
Mm.
to take advantage of us. So that's certainly my hope, to be at least a voice out there that will provide people accurate information about what this opportunity really is, as opposed to what the MLM companies are saying that it is. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation spread by MLM companies and the MLM industry, the Direct Selling Association, which is the lobbying organization for the industry. It just puts out statistics and numbers that simply cannot be true. I mean, they're demonstrably false, but they are the voice of the industry, and they get quoted and put out there as facts.
Yeah, I mean, and we live in I think we've always lived in a propaganda world. I mean, I traced it back to Sumeria, where companies that were making beer first designed little logos to put on the caps of the beer, before the crown cap was invented, of course. But there's always been this thing about selling. I found that looking at at English history in under Henry VIII, we find that he decides because his father is not really the heir to the throne, Henry VII. He's the battle between York and Lancaster has happened, and so to legitimize the succession to the throne, Henry VIII starts this propaganda about King Alfred and his the relationship back to there. But he also then goes off to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, which is a fascinating set of stories. But it's used to say, well, we're here legitimately. His daughter, Elizabeth, who's generally in the history books called Good Queen Bess, which I kind of doubt, as she spent more time with her chief torturer than any other court official during her reign, because she was quite interested in that kind of thing. But there was actually an edict put out that if you showed any portrait of her other than the official portrait, then you would be imprisoned, and you might well be executed for treason for having the wrong picture of the Queen. So there have been tight boundaries, and very important to show the right image. In the late 19th century, particularly after the Civil War in the US, modern advertising began. And it began with companies that are now established pharmaceutical companies, like Eli Lilly, for example, who were selling concoctions of cannabis, opium, and alcohol for the many people traumatized by that most horrific of wars. And out of that, we then get, I think, Quaker Oats are the first people start packaging things. Things were just pushed on until now we're bombarded every day with tens of thousands of words selling us some sort of product. Now, what I think is incredibly important about what you've done is I have talked with various people who are seeking to expose MLMs and who have terrible stories to tell. And it's really good that they're out there doing it. But the idea that there is a website you can go to before signing up to one of these things and have a look at what the reality is, and that website is being put forward by somebody with tremendous expertise. You really know what you're talking about. This isn't just, you've read the Reader's Digest and have an opinion. You've spent decades understanding the legal situation and seeking to and managing to do something about it. So I would definitely advocate that people make your site known, so that anybody who's being approached by one of these companies that's going to try and stop them from talking to dream stealers like you and me, that anybody who's being approached by this can go and find out the basics and understand what they might be letting themselves into by looking at your website. And we will put links in the description below.
Well, thank you so much for that voice of confidence. I really appreciate it. And I enjoyed talking with you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to field them, or if and I'm happy to talk later if you know, if there's interest in among your subscribers.
But by all means, when we put the video up, take a look at the comments and see what we have there. I'd be very happy, to circle back in 2 or 3 months' time and see where you've got to, and introduce you to other podcasters who have significantly more subscribers than I do, which is a tragedy, by the way. That people aren't flocking in their millions to shower me with money. I don't know what's wrong with them. I'm evidently not selling the right things here, but I'm afraid that's the way it's going to be. So, yep, Doug, a great pleasure to spend a little time with you, and we'll maybe get back together in a few months' time and see where we've got to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.